Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We'll be getting started in just a second. We'll give all the stragglers just 30 seconds to join, and those who aren't here right at the hour will be missing the wonderful intro, but they'll be able to catch the good stuff. All right, so my name is Blake Kingston. I'm the marketing director here at Sovra, and thank you very much for joining us, taking the time out of your day. We have a fantastic session planned here, a lot of great information, so we're going to jump right in. So just wanted to give you a little introduction to our presenters today. We have Michelle from the City of Long Beach, Dominique and Elena from the Partners for Public Good, and Jeanette from Sovra, who is our Director of Customer Advocacy. So a quick overview of the agenda today. So first, Michelle's going to kick off by giving us a little overview of the story for City of Long Beach's procurement makeover. And then next, we're going to be jumping into a panel discussion, talking about a variety of different items around change management. And then we'll finish it off with tools and techniques from Dominique. So some great takeaways for everybody to kind of take back. And then time permitting, we'll open things up for questions. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A chat. There's usually a little bar or ribbon along the bottom there that you'll see the Q&A, as well as also we have the chat function. So feel free to say hi, say where you're dialing in from, and feel free to interact with each other on there as well. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Michelle to get us started.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Wilson. I am the purchasing agent with the City of Long Beach. Just a little quick background about myself. I have been with purchasing for a little over 5 years now, but I have been with the City of Long Beach for 28 years. So I spent the bulk of my career with the Parks and Rec department. And then came over to purchasing about 5 years ago. So I just want to give you some background because it will make a little more sense when I start talking about the makeover and kind of the change management style that I brought to the team. All right, so there we go. So I'm going to do my best to put this whole makeover, which was a lot of work and a lot of years, into 5 minutes. So usually I can talk about this for hours and hours, but I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version and squeeze it all in. But happy to, after this webinar is finished, I'm always happy to engage and brag about it more. All right, so the Extreme Procurement Makeover. This was a top to bottom renovation of procurement policy, process, and practice with the support of the Harvard Kennedy School Government Performance Lab, which at the time was known as GPL, and now the other panelists today, they are known as the Partners for Public Good. So PPG. So I will refer to them both ways just because during the makeover, they were GPL. The goal of the makeover was to make procurement in Long Beach better for our user departments, the business community, and ultimately the residents of Long Beach. This 4-year effort was guided by 4 pillars of success: efficiency of fairness, being results driven, equity, and strategy. These pillars came directly from our model procurement plan, which was the first step in our makeover where we really outlined our missions and our values. First, through the pillar of efficiency and fairness, we transformed the procurement process to be efficient, ethical, inviting, and transparent. We worked to improve outcomes for goods and services by focusing on improving solicitation templates and training departments to write results-driven RFPs. We focused heavily on equity in procurement, ensuring diversity and inclusion in all of our solicitations. We believe everyone should have access and opportunity. Lastly, our 4th pillar of success was using procurement as a strategic function, assisting the City of Long Beach with our economic recovery efforts while we all recovered from COVID. You can go to the next slide. And of course, now my phone is ringing. Okay. This next slide is a breakdown of the 4 years and how we transformed how city dollars were spent and the impact they achieved. Year 1 was an internal transformation, focusing on efficiencies with our practices and processes. Year 2, we focused outward on the vendor community, making improvements to increasing diversity and advancing equity. We did some of this through our implementation of our new procurement software, which is hosted by Sovra. In year 3 and 4, We grew our outreach efforts, making improvements to increase local participation, all while looking for sustainability to be able to continue the great work that had been done. All right, next slide. All right, and for anybody who's heard this before, this is my very favorite slide. We use it all the time. It really is just a snapshot of the overall transformation on what we accomplished each year of the makeover. So as I mentioned in the last slide, in year one, we focused internally on process improvements. In order to do that, we started with looking at the existing data that we had to give ourselves a baseline on what we needed to improve on. We also talked to internal stakeholders about their pain points with procurement. We updated our RFP template, making it more inviting and easier to navigate for the business community, and laid it out in a way that departments could write better, more meaningful, and succinct RFPs. We implemented a number of trainings through what we called Procurement University. We trained hundreds of department staff in the basics of procurement and the ethics behind why it is important to have a fair and transparent procurement process. Another success from year one that continues to this day is our forecasting meetings. These are meetings that take place once a year with our department staff and our procurement team. We discuss what the departments plan to procure in the next year and work through a plan to ensure that we have the best procurement method being used. We leverage cooperative agreements and we look at citywide contracts. We are also able to discuss outreach options to ensure competition and assist with local participation. In year two, we shifted our focus externally to the vendor community. We sent out a vendor survey in which we received over 300 responses. We got very valuable feedback from existing vendors, vendors that had never done business with the city, and vendors that had submitted bids or proposals and weren't successful. We also facilitated several focus groups so we could really take the time to hear feedback from the vendor community as it related to the challenges that they faced when doing business with the city or trying to do business with the city. We implemented a new procurement software, which we call Long Beach Buys, which is hosted by Sovra. It was more business friendly and had the ability to capture better data. This implementation prompted another initiative, which was expanding our outreach efforts. We started with a completely new system with no data, so we really had to go out and push vendors to be able to register. And last but not least, in year two, we ran what we call an RFP-a-thon. This was a 6-week course where we coached 45 department staff on how to write results-driven RFPs. After we completed year one and year two, we focused internally and externally. In year three, we shifted the focus on sustainability and developing partnerships to further build up vendor capacity. One example of a partnership was with our technology and innovation department, who we worked with to launch the Pitch Long Beach program. This is a program that invites vendors to propose innovative ideas to the city that continues to be successful to this day. When we named this project the Extreme Procurement Makeover, even we didn't realize how extreme it would actually become. Each success built on the next, and by the end of year three, we looked back and we were able to really see the impact that we had achieved. Although our partnership with GPL ended after 3 years and technically the makeover had concluded, we have been able to sustain and continue to make improvements through year 4 and beyond to today. I can confidently say to you that today doing business with the City of Long Beach is easier and more inclusive. And all of that was possible through successful modernization through change management. Thanks, Blake.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. And you got a nice little shout out from your neighbor in Thousand Oaks, Grace, who wanted to say that the Long Beach story and the team are great. So, and I concur.
Awesome.
So thank you very much for guiding us through that, but don't go too far because I think you're going to be kicking us off here in the panel. So yeah, we're going to jump into the panel section now. So we have a list of questions that we're going to run through and get some insights for you. So the first one, which I think, yeah, Michelle, you're going to be kicking us off. What are the most common internal blockers that you see, and how can procurement leaders preempt them?
I think the most common internal blockers, well, I can say probably I was one of them. I came from a department, and so that's why I kind of shared my experience. I came from a department, and so I saw procurement as a barrier to getting me what I need. So I would say when I came on this side, one of the internal blockers probably that a lot may experience is the user departments who maybe don't understand the process fully. I think sometimes just staff in general that's resistant to change can be a blocker. And also sometimes your policymakers or your elected officials or your commissioners or whoever is your kind of governing body can also be a blocker.
Mhm. Excellent. Dominique, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on the panel. So yeah, change is tricky. I think in particular in government generally. So at Partners for Public Good, I support the Procurement Excellence Network, and it's a virtual community of over 2,100 governments who really see the value in procurement as a strategic lever of change. And we often talk to these governments and these leaders in these governments about just what's happening on the ground, and change management comes up quite a bit. And so I think thematically, when you have these conversations about change across these different governments, you kind of have these themes that tend to arise. And I think one of the barriers that we often hear from these governments that's happening is a lack of planning, right? So sometimes governments are launching these reforms and doesn't really factor in how the processes will be received or adopted by the folks that are going to be experiencing the change, and thinking about pathways of resistance. And I think that plays a big factor of success. Stakeholder buy-in is important. I think Michelle alluded to this, but sometimes the impacted stakeholders are sometimes victims of change, not really invited into the process to talk about what the change could be and what it means. There's also just a tendency to have like this risk-averse culture and this sentiment of like good enough philosophy. Like folks get comfortable doing things one way, and sometimes there's this thought process like, why should we change? Is it valuable to me if we do that? And then I think one other that I think we can't leave out is kind of the sentiment of change fatigue. Sometimes when change happens too much across an organization, that kind of prevents more ongoing efforts for more change because people are not as excited about it because they're still trying to settle in for the change that just happened. So I think across governments, we often see these types of changes that are happening internally.
Excellent. Yeah, it seems like I think getting ahead of this, there's no such thing as too early in getting ahead of this.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next question. So what does early buy-in actually look like in practice, and who needs to be at the table from day one? So Jeanette, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Sure. So, I mean, I think in my work working in change management and government, both at the federal level and at the city of Philadelphia, I think the one thing about early buy-in is that people just need to show up. And so sometimes I think people are always like, oh, we're going to go so far. Like you can only go so far if you haven't had people just like be with you from the moment. So Dominique really talking about like really understanding stakeholders, really understanding both those people who might be excited about change or ready for it, but also those folks who maybe have had some bad experiences with change and are a little bit more resistant. Buy-in will look different for those groups of people. I found in my experience that getting early buy-in from your champions, your people who want to, promote change, they'll come and they'll bring their ideas. They'll say, hey, I did this or I thought about this, and they'll come to the table ready for that conversation. But you don't want to miss the people who are resistant or the people who are more concerned. And so, but buy-in for them might be them just agreeing to attend your meeting. I had a guy I worked with at the city of Philadelphia who refused to meet with me for like 4 months. And then one day he showed up to one of my meetings and I was like, all right, I gotta play it cool because he's here and I don't want to scare him away. But like it just took him some time to get in there. But then when he started to get involved, I think he started to see the value for him and for his team. So that kind of leads into this like second question about who needs to be at the table from day one. You often hear folks in the practitioner space talking about doing a stakeholder assessment, really understanding your ecosystem for change and how change is going to be impactful and impacting different people across your organization, both internally and externally. So for me, day one, you need a strong executive team of sponsors, folks who are going to rally around your organization, who are going to say what we're doing, but then who are also going to follow it up with their own action, really continuing to promote the change and really being owners of that change. And then you need that sort of spectrum of folks from your organization, everyone from the very excited, we used to call them Tiggers in some of my change management practitioner work. So the people who are very, very excited, very hyped for change, all the way through your Eeyores who are maybe dragging their feet. And in the middle, you've got some Poos who are a little bit there, a little bit not quite there yet, but could be there. And you really want to have representation from all of those groups, so that you can really understand how different people in your organization are going to kind of consume change. And so you can think about the best way to engage all of those folks based on where they are and based on how they show up as this initiative evolves.
Love that. Wouldn't be a webinar without Winnie the Pooh reference. Awesome. Michelle, do you want to add anything to this?
Sure, and I'll continue with the reference. I agree. All three need to be at the table. I think the folks I mentioned at the beginning that could be resistant definitely need to be at the table. But I think what's really important about early buy-in is getting everybody, making sure we all have kind of common goals and common values. I think we all can understand that and understand the end goal, and what our values are. And with that in mind, if you start with that piece, then you really are able to kind of get everybody a little less resistant to the change and have early buy-in, because we all know where we're trying to get to. We might not agree on how we're getting there exactly, but when we all have that same end goal, it really does shift the Eeyores and the Poos to kind of understand why the change is needed and be a little less resistant to it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, understanding what is in it for them, always a very, very positive thing. Excellent. So question 3 we have, what are some of the early warning signs that vendors are struggling with new processes? So Elena, I think we're going to be introducing you here. So
yeah, well, thanks so much for having myself and Dominique here today. And I really appreciate this question because I think so often it's really easy to think about how change is going to impact your internal staff. But when we talk about procurement, vendors are some of the most important stakeholders that we need to be thinking about when we're making any kind of change. So whenever we're thinking about changing some aspect of the procurement or contracting process for vendors, I think it's really important for us to ask the question about, how will we know that this is working for our vendors, and how will we know if our vendors are confused or struggling? And so to break that down a little bit more, to me, it's really about thinking about 3 things. Awareness, right? So do vendors even know that the process has changed or that something is happening differently? And do they know the why behind it? Like, why was this change happening? Why has there been a new investment? And then thinking about capability. Are vendors interacting as expected with the new process? Do they have the information to navigate something completely new? And also user experience. Are you seeing some kind of avoidance in these new systems from vendors? Or are they stepping back from participating in your procurements because the user experience isn't maybe what they're used to or what they would hope to experience? So I think there's a lot of ways to answer those questions from my perspective. Michelle in Long Beach and some of the other cities we've worked with have done a really excellent job of taking the time to survey their vendor community and do focus groups with their vendor community to really understand the perspective that vendors have. And then there's all sorts of data components that you can look at too, right? How many people started a RFP response in your system, for example, but then abandoned it, or how many people started to register as a vendor, but then abandoned it in some way. Are you getting as many bids as you expected? Are people submitting the wrong information in one of the form fields, and it's really unclear what you were actually asking for in that field? So really, in summary, I think it's a mix of talking to vendors and then really thinking about what data you have on your hands that you can look at to understand whether your e-procurement system is working.
Michelle, from your experience with Long Beach, do you want to add anything here?
I would echo definitely everything Elena said. I think just a general lack of participation is an obvious indicator. And then kind of like Elena said, when they maybe start participating and then they don't participate any longer because there's confusion. I also think in Long Beach, something that even before I got to this position that has been an asset to this team is having staff that's dedicated to the vendor community and talking to the vendor community on the phone, the old school way of actually talking to folks and not always emailing. So I think just general feedback that we get in that space from vendors is very good indicator to us, if there's still confusion. I think, and then very much taking the approach that not everyone understands procurement, not understands the process. And so taking it from a very basic level of understanding and explaining it in that way. And I can speak to that personally because I came into procurement not fully understanding procurement. So I was really able to look at it from a vendor perspective or from a staff perspective, and say, why are we using such big words all of the time here in procurement? Is it really necessary to have all those big scary words? And come to find out it isn't always necessary. So just breaking down the process and breaking down some of the barriers can really kind of show whether what you're doing is working.
Fantastic. All right, we'll move on here. So, Elena, I think we're going to come back to you on this one as well. So, how do you design change management efforts that work for both large vendors and small disadvantaged businesses? Because I know this is definitely a big concern of a lot of those that are going through a transformation, is kind of, adhering to both parties. So,
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. And I think all of us on this call, like, we know that like no vendor is the same and that vendors really differ in terms of their capacity. So just to give an example, I was working with one city government where they went digital with their procurement process, and that was extremely well received by a lot of big companies that were, had been telling the city for years that they were really behind in digitizing things. And it was completely not well received by a lot of these, small local equipment auto repair vendors who were way more comfortable with a paper-based process and had learned how to use that process over the years. And so, one of the things that we have to remember too for a lot of these small firms is that there's not a person just sitting there waiting to respond to RFPs and bids or to navigate your vendor registration process. In these small, especially small disadvantaged businesses, there's a lot of people wearing many different hats, and they are not going to have the time to carefully study all of your different rules or regulations, or to Michelle's point, like look up what all those procurement terms mean. And so it's really, really important to think about like how are we making this process as accessible as possible for these small and local businesses. And I think there's a lot of things that folks on this call have probably thought about quite a bit, especially too that we often don't leave bids and RFPs open for long enough for some of these small firms to respond, or they're not hearing about them because in our vendor registration system we have some contact that left that business 5 years ago, right? So there's actually a lot of legwork that needs to be done to make procurement more accessible to small businesses. And so that's always something that we're excited to chat with people about.
excellent. Jeanette?
Yeah, I definitely agree everything Elena said. I would add that like when you're thinking about if you're doing a modernization effort, maybe you are moving from paper to digital. One thing that we used to do, I worked at the VA, and while we weren't working in procurement, we were often delivering software to veterans. And so I think something that we did that I feel like is a great way to tackle this approach is make sure you have a long runway to get people comfortable so that your early adopters, your larger businesses that maybe do have a dedicated team or are excited to bring more technology into the process can onboard faster, but you have a longer tail to allow folks who maybe are going to need just more time or just more familiarity with the system before they get comfortable moving from that paper to that digital ecosystem. And I think the reason that often this approach works really well is that then you can do what Michelle talked about, like do a lot of that really intentional engagement work with the vendor community, with those vendors that really need that help to make sure that you can help them be as comfortable as possible over the course of this change. I worked at the city of Philadelphia. We did a ton of vendor outreach in our Doing Business with the City program. We had an entire week where we were focused on working with our minority, disabled, women-owned businesses in the city to really help them do like live trainings on the system, like really help them get a little bit more comfortable with some of the changes we were looking to do in our procurement modernization. And I think that that longer runway allows for more intentional engagement for the businesses that really need that help. And it allows you to think about different ways or different offerings, because you're not offering it to everybody. You're offering it to folks who need it, so you can scale your offering based on what you see in terms of adoption, system adoption, and things like that.
Excellent. All right, Michelle, we're going back to you on this one. So what advice do you have for building a long-term change-ready culture? I know that you've had great success with this in Long Beach, so would be very curious that rather than just trying to drive that, one-time change effort. So really, how do you make it stick?
I have lots of thoughts on this one.
Give them all.
I'll keep it shorter. So I think one of the first things is trust. Like, so you definitely have to build trust with folks. And so with change management, it's very important to communicate in many different ways. But it's important not to communicate in the way where you are just telling vendors, you're telling staff what they're doing wrong. Instead, it's important to communicate how to do it right. And that's a lot of that is by building trust. And so I think in order to have a long-term culture of change and not just a short-term, you have to build that trust. You have to have different communication styles. You have to invite folks in. You also have to be willing to sit at the table and say, I don't know everything there is to know. I value everybody's input. And we're going to do this together. We're going to do this change together until it gets to a point which is where we are here in Long Beach now. That we have the trust mostly of the vendor community. I won't say 100%, but we have the trust through our transparency and through our efforts with the vendor community. We also have the trust of the staff because they understand that this change is of value to them. They're now seeing the results. They're seeing these good contracts. They're seeing engagement. They're seeing more participation, just all of the things that have come out of the makeover, so that now they trust us. And they also know that we are available. We're available at any time. I think some of my staff would say, okay, we're too available. Can we stop being so available to everybody? But it has really created a culture of now we don't even need to always be the ones to be available. Like the rest of the city has kind of stepped up and started helping each other in this procurement world. And I see it often in our office hours that we host. So I think really just building trust, not being those folks that just reject and say, you're doing this wrong, but really taking the time to say, hey, this is how you can do it right. And this is why it's important to do it right. And then they start to see those results.
Elena, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I just so agree with everything that Michelle has said. The other just small component I would add on to this is that at Partners for Public Good, one of the things that we often talk about a fair bit is this idea of competing commitments that get in the way of change. And Dominique's going to share a little bit more about that at the end of this call. But very often, even if there is a major change that a government wants to make, there's some like very logical, very rational competing commitment that that government has that is getting in the way of them making that change. And just to, make this a little bit more real, you could imagine a government that may really genuinely want to increase transparency in procurement and want to make that change somehow. But at the same time, if they really kind of interrogate their thinking around this, they've got this competing commitment that they don't want to look bad publicly and they don't want to open themselves up to all of this scrutiny, right? And so what we often see is that governments just kind of push really hard on the change they want to make without stepping back and saying, well, what's actually like moving us in the other direction away from that change? And how do we create a culture in our government where we're talking about that other thing that is keeping us from making that change so that we can kind of confront that other thing head on rather than just pushing forward on that one change that we want to make? So that's something we'll share some more resources on, but it's a nice way of thinking about things.
Excellent. I'm curious as well, like the cliche that you hear sometimes is, celebrating the small wins. I'm wondering if you have any examples of that or what your thoughts are along, let's not just wait till we, hit the end goal that we're getting to, but celebrating those little milestones along the way and making sure that we publicize that among the team. How much of an impact does that have? That's for anybody.
Michelle, go ahead. It looked like you were about to jump in.
I mean, Elena, I'm going to jump in anytime I can. I actually, this is one thing I say to any group I ever do this presentation for, any form of this presentation. It's a lot, and we accomplished a lot, and I'm really proud of that. But don't look at it as, oh my gosh, I need to do this makeover in my city. You can't look at it that way. It's too overwhelming. Even at the time when we knew we were doing this extreme procurement makeover, I had no idea what we were going to accomplish in the end. We really took it chunk by chunk and win by win. And when we got one win, then we built on the next win. And then we went back and looked at that first win and said, how can we make that a little better? And then we did the next one, and then we did the next one. And then, like I said, 3 years later, here it is, this great makeover. But it really was in pieces and in chunks, and it's really important to take it win by win, because if you just pick, maybe update a template, you have no idea what kind of effect that may have. That's one of the first things we did, and it made everyone's life easier. Everybody loved it. The vendor community, it was so pretty and inviting, and just that one step, and not to say it wasn't a lot of work, but it was a lot of work, but just that one win really did make a difference. So you really can make a difference just step by step, win by win.
Just to add on really quickly to that, I mean, I think one of the things that has surprised me and some of the work that I've done in governments and when I was in the city of Los Angeles is that a lot of templates that we're giving to vendors, these are PDF templates that aren't fillable, so that people are still handwriting into those templates, right? And even just taking 3 hours to make a PDF, a fillable template, so that folks don't have to transcribe that information and have to, try to navigate what a vendor was writing. Those types of things, if you can identify those really quick wins that are going to be a win for the vendor community and a win for your team, that can be that starting momentum that gets people to really see that there's a lot of changes that are within a procurement team's control, that will provide the momentum to create the bigger changes later on.
Fantastic. So we're going to move on now to talking about some KPIs. So no, Dominique, you have a couple slides here, so let me know if you want me to advance to them. But we're going to look at the data outcomes and how they can help reinforce the case for change, and what KPIs you think are most important to help measure this. So Dominique, let me know if you want me to go on to the slides.
Yeah, feel free to go to the next slide, and
Yeah.
I'll be presumptuous here and just ask maybe those that are on the call to maybe type in the chat if currently you all are navigating a change in your organization. Either you're planning it, either you're in the midst of being a stakeholder that's impacted by it. Maybe just put a thumbs up if you're currently going through a change right now. But the reason why I really want us to kind of anchor ourselves in kind of any changes that we're going through right now is because I think it makes this all relatable. When your government or your department or your team is thinking about making a change, the success of that hinges upon you defining what success looks like from the onset. So having that clarity from the beginning, making sure that you align on what, after this happens, what do we want to see taking place is really, really important. And so change management is, I think we've alluded to it with different responses, but just quite clearly, I'll state it, at its core, it's a people-centered process. And so your goal through this is you're trying to educate folks, you're trying to empower folks, you're trying to equip individuals to thrive through a change or a series of changes. And because that can vary in scope and magnitude depending on what you're trying to change, anytime you're making a shift, it really requires this like thoughtful planning. And that also considers you thinking through KPIs and metrics. Like, how do you make sure that what you want to happen is happening, right? So I didn't want to necessarily come here with a pick list of metrics because your change is going to be different than another organization's change. So in lieu of that, I really think it's helpful to when you are thinking about measuring and validating if the transformation achieved the goals that you set forth is kind of anchoring it in some questions that helps you think about if behavior changes are happening, right? So in my role at the Procurement Excellence Network, I do a lot of training. So I'm always trying to make sure that learning is taking place. And so when you're thinking about learning, that's the absorption of knowledge. And it's when explicit becomes implicit. So you don't have to think of something, it just happens, right? So think about when you first learned how to ride a bike. There was a point when you had to have the training rules on and learn how to do that. But then at a certain point, you just did it. And so I think that that similar concept of like learning and making sure that that's taking place is a similar concept in change management and making sure that, you know, when you roll out an initiative and you're trying to measure its effect and impact, you're looking at things like, is your team acknowledging, adopting, or accepting the change in the short term and long term? So like if you could yeah, you can go ahead and select the next one too. So here's a few questions that I encourage you all to maybe think about as you're kind of customizing the KPIs for your own change initiative. So in the short term, one of them could be acknowledgement. So are the stakeholders that are impacted by this change aware of it, right? Do they understand its impact? Do they understand how it's going to change how they do their job or how they show up to work every day? And have you truly taken the time to clarify the nuances of how that's going to shift? Because it's not just, oh, let's say we're rolling out a system. Well, I need to know specifics on how that's going to change my job, for example, right? So making sure that acknowledgement is there and people understand what's happening. Another question you really want to think about is adoption. So in that context, it's, you know, with that information that you've provided, did they get the adequate training to build their proficiency to navigate through the change? And then do they feel ready? Right, to engage with that change, and are they prepared to work within it? And then from a long-term perspective, when you're thinking about behaviors, am I seeing the transformation that I want to happen? You can look at acceptance and then also capacity building. Acceptance is really looking at, are there shifts in motivations, mindsets, and morale? Once the change has happened, are you seeing people are positive about it, right? Are you seeing that they're organically shifting how they do things to that are in line with the change you expected to see, versus it being forced, but people are just naturally gravitating towards the change. And then capacity building is something I personally just, like I said, spend a lot of time thinking about generally with my trainings, but it's capacity and making sure, capability, I'm sorry, does your staff know what to do? Confidence-wise, are they really confident in their own ability to navigate through that? And then the competency, which is basically, are you seeing that the work and the output lines up? So on the next slide, I want to spend a little time going through an actual example because I think it makes all these kind of questions kind of feel real, right? So imagine, let's say that you are making a change to, let's say, a P card program, right? Expanding the utilization of that across multiple departments. You can use those questions as an anchor point to measure short-term and long-term metrics, for example. So let's say that if you wanted to measure adoption, right? Have stakeholders been provided the information, or do they understand what they need to do? You could create metrics around training completion rates. You could also look at satisfaction rates for your training. So for example, when people have gone through your 90-minute module, for example, are they coming out of that saying, I understand this information or I'm still confused? Was this effective in helping me understand what I need to do? If not, that gives a signal that you need to go back and adjust to get to the behaviors that you want to see, right? And then from a long-term perspective, let's say that you wanted to measure capacity building. So has the staff demonstrated that confidence and that competency to adopt a change? You could look at things like policy adherence rate, as well as like voluntary retraining. And the reason why I like something like voluntary retraining as a ratio, as a metric, is because that speaks to people are understanding why the change is important and proactively raising their hand to say, I would like more information, or I know that I'm not quite where I want to be, but I want a little bit of extra context to get me where I know I should be. And I think that speaks to how their mindset has shifted in the direction to say, yes, let me make sure that I'm moving in alignment with said change. So hopefully that's helpful. I know that there's a lot of different types of metrics we can come up with, but I think anchoring them in these questions of behavior, I think really would be helpful.
I think you get the gold star for a panel response
Okay.
Excellent. I don't know if Michelle or anybody else has anything to add on to that. That was a phenomenal response, and I love the homework that you brought with it. But yes, if anybody else wants to add on to that. If not, we can go on to the last question. Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
I have a, it's not as cool as Dominique's with the I just have a real basic answer for the KPIs that that we look at sometimes. I mean, data, of course, is definitely a driver, but we all know data doesn't tell the whole story. But I think looking at, cycle times, that's something that we definitely have looked at to see how long the process takes in its entirety. We look at local participation, since that's a big thing here in Long Beach. So we look at the numbers to see if our outreach efforts are working. And I think just seeing that folks are following the procurement process too, there's less exceptions, there's less, folks going around the procurement process. That's a good indicator too that we are, it's been successful. And I think the last one, which is just really simple, is that folks just keep showing up to be a part of the process. I think if, folks just keep showing up, and staff keep showing up to the trainings, and vendors keep showing up to our webinars, that's a very good indicator that, we're doing things right, and we should continue the momentum.
Excellent.
Yeah. And can I jump back in with that? Because
Yes.
actually what Michelle said really, I think, resonated. I think the metrics also give folks an opportunity to say, to measure how they are moving through the change themselves. So it gives kind of managers and teams the ability to say, okay, I can see my progress as well. And I know for a person like me, like I want to make sure that I'm progressing continuously. So it gives me a way to say, yes, this is a barometer by which I can move something forward or not move something forward. So I really like the fact that having the metrics front and center, especially at the forefront when you're rolling out change and saying, this is what we're actually going to be looking at, I think makes things change feel less abstract and a little bit more personalized, right? And approachable.
Absolutely. That's great. And for any of our participants right now, we will share the slides. We'll send an email out following the webinar with the slides. So if anybody's trying to take notes and stuff like that, don't worry, we will be sharing all this information along with the recording as well. So yeah, so I think Jeanette, we're going to go to you for the final panel question here. And it's what's the one mindset shift that procurement teams need to adopt to navigate the future of modernization efforts?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I worked with a fantastic leader and public servant whose refrain was often, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And just because it's failed before doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And like that, I feel like is my entirety of this answer is don't be afraid because it feels really big. Like Michelle said, like don't think about this ecosystem. Think about your lowest hanging fruit, the first bit of work where you can go and make progress, build off of that. And if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times at the city of Philadelphia. We tried that 20 years ago and it didn't work. Well, it's 20 years later and, let's give it another go. And so I think not being afraid to be that person who raises their hand or that person who says, you know what, I have an idea, or I'm willing to take on this challenge, and just be that first person to say yes. And what you'll find is that oftentimes people are just waiting for someone to like break the ice for them to say, you know what, I had an idea about vendor payments too, for how we can make that process more efficient and transparent. And the cards will start to fall. So just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And just because it's failed doesn't mean you shouldn't try again.
Dominique, you want to add anything?
Yeah, mine is just very straight to the point. Like change should never be a secret or a surprise to anybody. Over communicating the change at every stage, even before it's a fully flushed out thought, communicating it through the change and then after is just really important. And I think launching a campaign of understanding, and I'm saying it in that way because sometimes communication just, oh, something is changing. But when you have a campaign of understanding, you're focusing more on details like, who is impacted? What is changing? When will changes occur? Where will changes be seen? Why does this matter? How does this connect with broader goals at the city or or the county, right? So really making sure people understand how change impacts them. So just over communicating it, I don't think you can say why change is happening enough. And then creating more of these feedback loops so people feel empowered as you are shifting this culture of change to know that when they say something and they have a reaction to the change, whether it's positive or negative, people want to be able to feel like they can say how they feel, right? And it won't be weaponized, or it won't be at a point where they feel like it won't be well received. So I think campaign of understanding, and then making sure that you have feedback loops with your stakeholders consistently.
Oh, did we lose her, I think? Unfortunately, well, I do love the campaign of understanding. I think that is a great term. I might even steal that, but that's I think a wonderful thing to kind of take away there. Really helps to drive home the change management. Unfortunately, we are going to jump into Dominique's section now for tools and techniques, and I think she's dropped off. So, Elaine, I don't know if I don't want to throw you on the spot, but I think Dominique's coming back on now. So
Yeah. It looks like she's just rejoining
Yes.
right now. Can you hear us,
Oh,
Dominique?
I guess you didn't like
Yep.
my answer. Okay.
I actually was going on about how much I loved your answer, so
Campaign of
Sorry, I hope
understanding.
you all heard the thought. So
we did. You dropped right at the end. It was perfect timing. Mic drop.
my apologies. Okay, so now we're at tools and techniques. So thank you for giving me space and time to talk about this. And so I was just hoping at the end of this conversation that everyone on the call, especially for those in the chat who indicated you were going through change, that maybe one of these resources could be in some way useful to you. And so, yeah, we're just going to go through a few of these options. And I would also invite Elena at any point, if there's anything else that you would like to add, feel free to jump in, if that's okay. Okay, so the first technique or tool I want to recommend is a stakeholder impact analysis. So the concept of identifying change champions came up earlier. I believe Jeanette and also Michelle mentioned that. And so I would say that if you were thinking about a change, and even if you're already in the midst of change, it's always helpful to kind of take a moment and take a step back and just think about who are those influencers, or Jeanette, did you say Tiggers earlier? Who are the people who are really excited about the change, but also folks who have just different personalities and different levels within the organization, or just people who you think could be really helpful in getting the word out, right? So just having a diverse team with varied expertise, et cetera, to help coordinate the change. But then also, like, once you have that group, like spending some time together, mapping out the outcomes of the change, and then also just thinking about who is actually going to be impacted by whatever the change you are going to make. So it's really making sure that you align on internal change management expectations, craft your messaging very early on about the benefits and the wins. Like, how do you sell this to different departments or different people within the organization? And then ultimately, determine who will benefit, or potentially who could potentially be resistant up front, and start thinking about, if there is some resistance, how can we overcome that? So I think that, doing this stakeholder impact analysis can be really helpful at the onset to be able to overcome some of the challenges that I mentioned at the top of the call, like the change fatigue, or perhaps the lack of stakeholder buy-in, et cetera. So that's one example. I'm curious if anyone who indicated they were currently in a change initiative right now, if you all have done stakeholder impact analyses. If you have, definitely put something in the chat so we can see if that's the case. The next tool that I would like to introduce to you all is something called a change management plan. And if this is something that you all use also in your initiatives, definitely also let us know that in the chat. But this is a great technique for making sure that you have a playbook for your change. So if y'all remember back in the day, like Thomas guides or MapQuest directions, when we had to print those out back in the day, think of this as kind of that roadmap to how you're actually going to navigate your change. And it outlines step by step what the change is, why it's being done, who is impacted by it, and the execution steps like timing, actions, resources necessary to implement the change. Now, there's obviously a lot of work that goes into putting together a change management plan, but that's where I think your change champions, who we talked about in the previous slide, really come in handy, because they can really help you put pen to paper to make sure you really think out more robustly how you want to execute the change. Hopefully you all can see to the left kind of the table of contents here, but this actually on the screen is an excerpt from a change management plan template that was used by the Halifax Regional Municipality in Canada, one of the governments who are represented in our Procurement and Excellence Network. And it's based on the ProSci methodology, but you'll see many different components in this change management template. It's like a change vision statement. It includes a change management team structure and role, so like your change champions and kind of what they do. It has a section for communication plans and messaging, and it even has a resistant management plan. And there's a few other categories in here as well, but I think you can customize your change management plan to fit your needs. And also the robustness of it depends on the scale of your change. But the premise is writing all this down so you understand what actually needs to happen. And it's also a reference point for those in your organization that may need to kind of see what's happening with the change as needed. What I also like about the template, this template as well, is the fact that there's like a change risk assessment. You could see that to the right, and it provides this ability to have this transparent method for measuring the scale of the impact on the organization. So you see different categories like the degree of role change or the variation in groups that are impacted. And it has a different type of criterion. So on a Likert scale, for 1 for no change, 5 to significant change. And by assessing this numeric impact value, I think it really allows your change champions team to really take a step back and say, if we're seeing 5s across the board, then we need to put a lot more effort into how we're actually communicating or training our team to be responsive to these changes. So I'm curious, again, if anyone has used a change management plan, but the Halifax team really enjoyed using this tool and definitely wanted to recommend this as an option as well.
Question for you, is this something that was then disseminated to the entire organization, or like how would it get used by the organization once it's developed?
In different ways. I think for in particular for this template, there was a shift in how the procurement team was being utilized or supporting the broader organization. So they used this as a template that was created by the core change champions or change management team. They spent a lot of time creating the playbook and using this as a project plan, if you will. And then they took excerpts of this and then communicated it out to the public. So this is also something that you can definitely publish on like an intranet site if that's something that you would like. I think it's really all up to the organization and how forward you want to be with the degree of change. Because sometimes too much information can be a little overwhelming, but also
Absolutely.
balancing that against maybe there's excerpts that are important. So for example, if someone was to perhaps want to adopt a change management playbook like this, the areas where I think they should probably definitely publish would be things like the manager's coaching plan, the stakeholder engagement plan. There's certain pieces that would definitely be more relevant to certain stakeholders. And then still making it accessible, people want to read it, but really pushing the parts of the change management plan that focus on mitigating the risk of the change not actually taking place. But definitely like parts like the vision statement and the mission statement of the change, like that in and of itself is really helpful. And I think everyone who's trying to organize a change should really think about, what is my mission statement, my vision statement? Make it pithy, make it impactful, make it something that is, has a ring to it, so people can really be using that as a way to memorize the change and the impact of the change that they're supposed to see happening. So
Fantastic.
yeah. And in the interest of time, I'll move on because I don't want to run out of time here. But the last tool and technique we want to talk through today is it's a two-parter, right? So there's a publication that we have here that we want to share from the Procurement Excellence Network, and then a template that we want to introduce as well. So I think what we have learned from today's conversation, from all the different experiences and expertise that's been represented on this panel, is that change is not easy, and everyone reacts to change differently. But it's definitely important. But Elena alluded to this earlier that, sometimes when change doesn't happen, our default reaction sometimes is to push harder, but instead it should be to take a step back, right? And diagnose why perhaps the change isn't taking place the way that we would like. And so Elena alluded to the fact of like this idea of competing commitments. And so to say it in another way, these competing commitments are like these blind spots, right? That limit us or our teams or our organization from acting upon the change you want to make. And so this concept of competing commitments is a term coined by the Harvard Graduate School of Education faculty Robert Keegan and Lisa Elahy as a part of their larger theory, immunity to change. And we reference that on this slide in case you guys want to go look up that book. It's a great read. Definitely go check it out. But in this publication from the Procurement Excellence Network, Why Reforms Encounter Resistance, How to Overcome Immunity to Change, the publication itself explores common roadblocks to change, but in it includes this immunity to change X-ray. And it's this diagnostic tool to like break down across 5 different components why perhaps you may be resistant to a change or your team, et cetera. And so I'll go through those 5 questions really briefly. And then while I do that, maybe someone from our team can like post this link in the chat because I think that'll be helpful for folks to download the resource. But in the template, the first question that's asked is, what is the commitment or change goal that you personally or your team would like to agree to, that you think is important or you actually would like to achieve? And then it asks you to consider, what you already know about the actions that you are taking, your team is taking, that may or may not be helping you achieve the goal. And then it asks, what are you or your team not yet doing to achieve the goal? So thinking broadly about what actions are not yet being taken that are steps that you think generally would result in making progress to the change if you're a little bit less resistant to it. And then gets at what is the competing commitment or the actions or the mindset that pushes you and your team away from that initial change goal. And then closing out with this question of what is this big assumption that you realize or your team has that may or not be true, and why is that impacting your approach to the change? And what we like about this activity is it's introspective, but also gives you a chance as a team to work through something together and maybe explore, is there something that just isn't quite working, and maybe give you some strategies on perhaps how you can adjust and repivot and move forward to make sure the change is actionable. So hopefully the link is dropped in the chat. I see our team has dropped it. Great. Definitely hope you all download that. But I guess in closing, what I would just say is, again, change is tricky. But if you all are committed to achieving a certain change management goal, we hope that one of these tools could be a helpful resource to you as you map out the change that you want to receive. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we do have like 5 minutes left here. Happy to give people time back, but if there's any questions that people want to send in, please do so now. While we're waiting for that, I will do one quick plug. We are currently running procurement leader survey right now. So what we're trying to do is gather some insights, and this is kind of like a benchmarking survey that we're hoping to run on an annual basis. So we will be, I'll put the link in the chat right now. And yeah, it takes about 5 minutes to fill out. It's just kind of looking at a few of the different ongoing trends, a few of the challenges facing procurement teams, and just where people are in their modernization journey. So would greatly appreciate it. It is a bit of a selfish plug here, but would greatly appreciate it if you could take 5 minutes to go ahead and fill out the survey for us. We did have one come in here. Any good advice for vendors in regards to dealing with procurement change within a buyer's organization? I don't know if anybody wants to take that. I can read it again if you guys didn't catch that. Any good advice for vendors in regards to dealing with procurement change within a buyer's organization? Does anybody want to?
I'm not sure I understand what the person means by buyer's organization. I wonder if they could share about
I guess the government, maybe?
and the
Solicitor is what they followed up with. I'm guessing how a vendor can deal with change within procurement change within the government is the question.
Got it. One thing I'll maybe just kick us off with is that I think a lot of our conversation today when we talked about vendors was thinking about, the procurement process itself, right? Everything from the moment which you're posting the solicitation until that contract is executed. I think oftentimes we take this kind of set it and forget it approach and think, oh, great, we got the contract signed, we hired a good vendor, there's nothing else to worry about. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to think about the vendor's experience as well after that contract is signed, right? Are you paying on time? Are you giving the vendor really clear instructions? et cetera, right? And
Mhm.
so I think we also have to think about the fact that there's a lot of change that can happen for vendors after the contract's signed, right? Whether it's changes in staffing, changes in how invoicing and payment works. So would just like encourage folks to think about, what does the vendor's experience look like on that second half piece too? But others, please jump in.
We did get one more question in, and this might be directed at Michelle. But did you have budgetary support for moving this initiative forward? And then they followed up with a lot of people want to change but aren't willing to invest in it.
Yes, I think investment is more than just money, though. Investment is time and dedication and all of that. I can say there was some budgetary support in the way that we did have a new procurement software that we needed to implement, but a lot of the change that we did didn't come with cost to it. A lot of it was internal trainings, external trainings, outreach efforts. We did hire a new outreach coordinator, so there is some investment there. But honestly, a lot of the investment started coming once we started kind of proving that the change was working. Then the investment started being made, but the upfront investment wasn't huge, money wise.
Excellent.
Blake, I know we're almost right at time.
Yes.
Say, just because it's been my personal experience, it's been very rare that aside from my own salary, that my change efforts have been resourced. So I would also say, even if it may be designing it a little bit differently, but I do think that there are things that you can do without increasing headcount and without having to ask for budget for promotional materials or printing materials. I know how difficult it is, especially now, to get budget requests approved for things. So I do think it requires a little bit of outside the box thinking, which I know I did a lot in my government time. But even if you don't necessarily have that line item, there are things that you can do with what you have to try to move things forward.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's it. I know we're right at the hour here, so I think that's a great spot to end it. Thank you very much to everybody who joined us today, and especially thank you very much to our wonderful panel for sharing the insights. I'm sure everybody probably got a great nugget of information from this, if not more. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody showing up, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well.